Aoife didn't know what to do. She couldn't just stay there and wait for her turn. She also couldn't leave. Mrs. Fitzpatrick knew she knew, and she wouldn't let her go easily. Suddenly, an incident occurred. One afternoon, while Aoife was cooking for Finn, she accidentally spilled a jar of spice. She was terrified, knowing Mrs. Fitzpatrick would be furious. Suddenly, Mrs. Fitzpatrick's phone rang. She walked out, leaving her phone on the table. Aoife looked at the screen. It was a text message from an unknown number. "I know what's happening in your house," the message said. "I know about the files. I know about the children. I'm going to expose everything." Aoife was stunned. Who had sent this message? She looked at the camera, and she saw Finn. He looked at her, a mysterious smile on his face. He knew. He had known all along. He wasn't a tool. He was an accomplice. An hour later, Mrs. Fitzpatrick returned, her face full of fury. "Someone sent me a terrible message," she said, her eyes fixed on Aoife. "Someone tried to ruin my life. I know it was you." "It wasn't me," Aoife said, her voice trembling. "I don't know anything about that." "Don't lie," she screamed. "You went into my study. You saw things that weren't yours. You went to meet someone at the cafe." Aoife looked at her, and she knew that she knew. But she wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight. Chapter 9. The final confrontation. That night, Liam came to Aoife's house. He had received a text message from Aoife. "We have to meet," the message said. She knows everything." Liam had found a journalist, a woman named Sarah, a woman who had once written an article about a similar case. She believed them. She had agreed to help. The next day, Liam, Sarah, and Aoife went to Mrs. Fitzpatrick's house. She was waiting for them. She knew they would come. The confrontation took place in the living room, a cold and dark room. Mrs. Fitzpatrick sat on a chair, her face full of anger and arrogance. "You think you can go against me?" she said, her voice full of ridicule. "You think a mediocre journalist can expose the truth about me? I can ruin your lives with a single phone call." "You can do whatever you want," Aoife said, her voice strong. "But you can't hide the truth. You did this to Orla. You did this to the other girls. You did this to the children. You treated us like lab animals, and you failed." "Failed?" She laughed, hysterically. "I have found the secrets of human development. I have found a way to make children smarter, stronger." "You're not a scientist," Sarah said, turning on her phone's recorder. "You're a monster. You exploited poor women. You exploited innocent children. You will pay." Mrs. Fitzpatrick stood up, her face contorted with rage. "Get out of my house," she screamed. "Right now." But then, Liam said something she couldn't have expected. "We have evidence, Mrs. Fitzpatrick. We have the files. We have the pictures. And we have a witness." She looked at Liam, and then she looked at Finn. The boy stood in the doorway, looking at her, a look of fear and hatred in his eyes. He knew everything. He was the living evidence. Mrs. Fitzpatrick was arrested. The whole story was exposed in the press. Her charity was shut down, and she had to go to prison. Orla, after hearing the story, cried a lot. She felt a sense of release. She no longer had to live in the shadows. She no longer had to blame herself. She had been saved, not by a miracle, but by the love and courage of her sister. Aoife became a hero. She had saved Orla, she had saved the children, and she had saved herself. A few months later, Aoife, Orla, and their family started a new life. Orla began to recover. She started painting again. Aoife began to study. She received a scholarship to go to university. Liam became a close friend of theirs. He was always there for them. One afternoon, as Aoife and Orla were walking down the streets of Dublin, Orla turned to her sister. "You know," she saved, "you saved me. You saved us." "We saved each other," Aoife replied, smiling. "We got out of that prison. And now, we're going to live a real life." Aoife looked up at the sky. She felt freer than ever. She was no longer a prisoner of slow-passing hours. She was a strong woman, a woman who had found freedom in her own struggle. Her life, Orlai's life, and their family's life, had been released, and that was a new beginning. The late summer sun streamed through the cafe window, but Aoife felt no warmth. Instead, she shivered, her body tense with fear and anger. Liam, sitting across from her, listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face. "A secret room," Aoife whispered, her voice trembling. "Full of photos and files? Not just of Finn and Sheen, but of so many other children. And Orla's file too." Liam frowned, his face a mask of concern. "Orla's file? Did she ever tell you anything?" "It wasn't an employee file," Aoife said, tears beginning to fall. "It was a detailed record of her emotional state. Subject shows signs of fatigue. Subject is becoming withdrawn. It was like a scientific report. And then I saw my own file. Aoife O'Donnell, starting June 15th. Liam was silent for a moment, taking a deep breath. "I suspected it," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Orla, ... She used to come to my cafe. She would sit there, just drinking a coffee, but she would stay for hours, as if she were looking for something. She looked so tired and scared, but she never said anything. Once, she told me, 'I think I'm slowly disappearing.' I didn't understand then, but now. It's an experiment," Aoife concluded, her voice full of fury. "She doesn't just want a babysitter. She wants to see how long a woman can endure isolation. She wants to see how we break." Liam took Aoife's hand, the warmth of his touch calming her. "You can't work there anymore," he said. "You have to leave immediately." "I can't," Aoife replied, shaking her head. "Orla hasn't recovered yet. My family needs the money, and now, she knows that I know. She won't let me go quietly. She said I have the potential to succeed. That means I won't break as easily as Orla. She'll see how much I can take." Liam looked at her, and he knew she was right. Mrs. Fitzpatrick wasn't just an employer, she was a hunter, and Aoife was her latest prey. "Okay," Liam said, his voice determined. "We'll do this together. You'll gather evidence. I'll help you. We'll expose the truth. We'll save you, and we'll save the others." Aoife looked at him, a tear of happiness rolling down her cheek. She no longer felt alone. She no longer had to fight this battle by herself. When Aoife returned to the house, she was no longer an innocent nanny. She was a spy in the very house she worked in. She began to observe everything. She paid attention to Mrs. Fitzpatrick's gaze as she glanced at the cameras, a look of power and satisfaction. She realized that the cameras were not just for surveillance, but to create a constant sense of being watched, an unceasing psychological pressure. She also paid attention to the children. Finn, the 4-year-old, seemed to realize something too. He would look into the camera and smile in a chilling way. Sheen, the 1-year-old, would cry without cause, as if reacting to something unseen. Aoife realized that the children were also victims. They had been trained to be tools in Mrs. Fitzpatrick's experiment. In rare moments of solitude, Aoife scrolled through her phone, not to contact friends, but to find information about Mrs. Fitzpatrick. She found an old article about her husband, and a mention of a secret charity she had founded. The charity wasn't for helping underprivileged children, but for funding a study on children's psychological development. A study conducted by herself, in her own home. One afternoon, while Sheen was sleeping, Aoife tried to snoop in the study. She couldn't find the files she had seen before. They were gone. Mrs. Fitzpatrick knew. She knew Aoife had been in that room, and she had moved the evidence. Aoife felt desperate. But then, she saw an old USB drive on the desk. She took it, hid it in her pocket, and prayed. It was her only hope. Finn, the 4-year-old, was the first to speak. Aoife had tried to build a relationship with him, not as a nanny, but as a friend. She had told him stories, sung him songs. She had done what normal nannies do, but this time, it wasn't an act. It was real. One afternoon, while they were playing with photos, Aoife pointed to a picture of a little girl. "Who is this, Finn?" she asked gently. Finn looked at the photo, his eyes wide. "That's Lily," he whispered. "Lily went away." "Where did Lily go?" Aoife asked, her heart pounding. "She took Lily away," Finn said, pointing to the camera. "She said Lily was too weak. She said Lily couldn't take it anymore. She took Lily away." Finn's words were like shards of a broken mirror, reflecting a terrifying truth. Mrs. Fitzpatrick wasn't just documenting the mental decline of the girls. She was intervening. She had intervened in the lives of the children, and the girls she considered too weak. Where had she taken them? What had happened to them? "Finn," Aoife said, her voice full of dread. "Did she take anyone else away?" Finn shook his head. "No, just Lily. But before that there was another girl. A girl with red hair. Orla," Aoife whispered, a cold feeling running down her spine. "Is she still here?" "No," Finn said, his voice full of sadness. "She took her away. She cried a lot. She said she was too weak." Finn's words confirmed everything. Mrs. Fitzpatrick had done this to Orla. She had taken her away. The discovery was a complete accident. One afternoon, while chasing Finn, who had escaped with a brightly colored scarf, Aoife stumbled into a part of the house she had never seen before. A small, narrow corridor with a single door at the end. The door was slightly ajar. Curiosity, a feeling she had forgotten she possessed, drew her in. The room was a study, not a traditional study filled with books and an antique desk, but a study of the human condition. The walls were lined with large, framed photographs. Photographs of children. Not just Finn and Sheen, but a dozen other children, of all ages, all in various stages of joy or sorrow. It was a bizarre, unsettling collection. On a large desk, a stack of meticulously organized files caught her eye. At the top of the stack was a file with Orla's name on it. Aoife's heart pounded in her chest. She knew she shouldn't look, but she couldn't stop herself. The file was a detailed account of Orla's time in the house, her start date, her salary, her hours. But it also contained a series of detailed notes, written in Mrs. Fitzpatrick's spidery handwriting. Notes on Orla's emotional state. Subject appears withdrawn. Subject exhibits signs of stress and fatigue. Subject's focus is deteriorating. It wasn't a file on a nanny. It was a file on a test subject. Aoife felt a cold, terrible fear grip her. The constant surveillance, the isolation, the mind-numbing routine. It wasn't just about childcare. It was an experiment, a cruel, deliberate experiment on the human psyche. She looked at her own file, lying underneath Orla's anew, untouched tab with her name on it. Aoife O'Donnell. Start date, June 15th. A sudden sound made her jump. The sound of the front door opening. Mrs. Fitzpatrick was home early. Aoife quickly shoved the file back into place, her heart hammering against her ribs. She took one last look at the photographs, at the faces of the silent children, and a new understanding dawned on her. These children weren't just the subjects of an experiment. They were the tools. The tools to break the spirits of the women who came to care for them. She felt a new kind of terror. The fear of being watched was gone, replaced by a much deeper, more chilling fear. The fear of being understood. The fear that her slow descent into madness was not a natural consequence of the job, but a preordained outcome. The fear that she was a willing participant in her own destruction. She fled the room. Her heart a drumbeat of panic. Her mind a whirlwind of fear. She had thought the job was a prison of hours. She had just realized it was a prison of the mind, and her captor was home. Mrs. Fitzpatrick's arrival was a test of Aoife's newfound knowledge. She had to pretend she hadn't seen the room, the files, the photographs. She had to act normal, a difficult feat when her hands were still shaking and her mind was a whirlwind of fear. "Aoife," Mrs. Fitzpatrick said, her voice surprisingly soft. "You look pale." Are you feeling ill? Aoife, a natural liar, found the words catching in her throat. No, Mrs. Fitzpatrick. Just ... tired. It was a long day. I understand, the older woman said, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. This job can be ... demanding. It requires a certain kind of resilience. Orla didn't have it. The mention of her sister, coupled with the knowing look in Mrs. Fitzpatrick's eyes, was a gut punch. It was a veiled threat, a silent acknowledgement that she knew exactly what Aoife had seen. But you seem stronger, Mrs. Fitzpatrick continued, her voice still unnervingly soft. I can see the potential in you, Aoife, the resilience, the potential to be ... one of the successful ones. Successful. The word hung in the air, cold and menacing. What did success mean in this place? Did it mean surviving the experiment? Did it mean not breaking? I'm sure you'll find a way to make the time pass, Mrs. Fitzpatrick said, a slow, knowing smile on her face. A way to entertain yourself. The conversation was a game of cat and mouse, a subtle dance of power. Aoife, with her newfound knowledge, saw the cracks in the facade. Mrs. Fitzpatrick wasn't just a wealthy, detached employer. She was a manipulator, a woman obsessed with control, with observing and documenting the slow decline of the women she hired. That night, Aoife went home, but she couldn't shake the feeling of the walls watching her. She looked at her phone, a lifeline to the world she felt she had lost. She scrolled through her friends' Instagrams, their carefree photos of beach parties and nights out, and felt a profound sense of disconnect. She was a ghost in her own life, a silent observer of a world that was moving on without her. She messaged Liam, the boy from the cafe, "Are you working tomorrow? I could use a coffee." He replied almost instantly, "Yes, 10 a.m. sharp, I'll have one waiting for you." The message was a small beacon of light in her endless darkness. She knew she couldn't leave the house during her shift. The cameras were everywhere. Mrs. Fitzpatrick's rules were absolute, but she needed to talk to someone. She needed to tell someone what she had found. She needed an accomplice the next day. During Sheen's morning nap, she slipped out of the house. It was a reckless, terrifying act. She left a note for Finn, saying she would be back in 10 minutes, a lie she hoped he wouldn't comprehend. She ran through the suburban streets, the fresh air a shock to her system, the sounds of the city a symphony to her starved ears. She found Liam at the cafe, his kind eyes and gentle smile a welcome relief. "I can't stay long," she said, her voice a hurried whisper. "I broke the rules. She's watching." Liam's face grew serious. "What did you find, Aoife?" he asked, his voice low and concerned. "What did you see?" And so, in a quiet corner of a busy Dublin cafe, with the smell of fresh coffee and pastries in the air, Aoife began to tell her story. A story of a lonely house, of a slow descent into madness, and of a horrifying secret that lay behind a single, unlocked door. A secret that had broken her sister, and was now threatening to break her, too. Aoife had always believed in the power of an hour. An hour to sketch in her notebook, an hour to walk through the bustling streets of Dublin, an hour to lose herself in a good book. An hour was a unit of freedom, a measure of possibility. But that was before the job, before she took on her sister's torment. The promise had been easy to make. Her older sister Orla, a woman with a spirit as vibrant as her red hair, had been a shell of herself for months. The job had broken her. It had taken a toll on her mental health, a kind of slow, insidious erosion of her personality, until all that was left was a quiet, haunted sadness. With her family's finances in a precarious state, and with Orla unable to return to work, Aoife, fresh out of secondary school, stepped up. "It can't be that bad," she'd said to Orla, a naive optimism in her voice. "It's just 2 kids. I'll be fine. You just rest." Orla had simply stared at her, her eyes wide and full of a profound pity that Aoife had been too young to understand. "It's not the kids, Aoife," she had whispered, her voice cracking. "It's the time, it's the silence, it's the watching." The job was in a private home in one of Dublin's leafy, affluent suburbs. The house, a sprawling Victorian with a manicured lawn, belonged to Mrs. Beatrice Fitzpatrick, a woman of formidable reputation and even more formidable wealth. Mrs. Fitzpatrick's husband was a prominent but rarely seen banker, and the home was her domain. A fortress of order and impeccable taste, Aoife's duties were simple: 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., Monday to Friday. She was to care for 2 children, Finn, 4 years old, and with a gaze that seemed to hold the secrets of the universe, and Sheen, a 1-year-old, with a laugh that could light up a room and a bite that could draw blood. The rules were strict, laid out in a precise, almost militaristic fashion by Mrs. Fitzpatrick herself. No phone, no breaks, a camera in every room, a constant unblinking eye. On her first morning, Aoife arrived full of a nervous energy. She wore her favorite jeans and a bright yellow jumper, a splash of color against the house's muted, tasteful tones. She believed she could tackle anything. She had babysat for years. She knew children. What she didn't know was what it felt like to be completely cut off from the outside world. The first few hours weren't so bad. She played with Finn's wooden train set. She sang lullabies to a sleepy Sheen. She thought of Orla, and a sense of pride swelled in her chest. She was doing this for her sister. She was a hero. But by 10 a.m., the slow, mind-numbing insanity began to set in. Finn, once a cooperative playmate, became a small, silent tyrant, demanding she restack the blocks in a precise, geometric order, a task that required her full attention. Sheen, now wide awake, decided biting was indeed his primary language of communication, clamping down on her arm and her hand with a ferocious, toothless grip that left red welts. There was no one to talk to, no one to share a laugh with, no one to commiserate. There was just the children's constant, non-verbal needs and the feeling of the cameras watching her every move. She felt a profound, suffocating loneliness. She looked at the clock, expecting to see noon, and her heart sank. It was only 10:15. The hours didn't just crawl. They stood still, an eternity of silent confinement. After a week, Aoife felt the first crack in her sanity. The vibrant yellow jumper was replaced by a gray hoodie. The energetic bounce in her step was gone. The world she had known, a world of friends and social media and the gentle chaos of her family, felt impossibly far away. She found herself staring at walls, a silent prisoner in a gilded cage. The children's toys, once bright and inviting, became a landscape of her own despair. The train set was a symbol of her trapped life, going in endless, predictable circles. The stuffed animals were silent witnesses to her slow unraveling. The worst part was the lack of conversation. She would talk to herself, to the children, telling them stories, singing songs, but there was no real dialogue. She was a performer, in a one-woman show, a monologue with no audience, save for the unblinking cameras. Her interactions with Mrs. Fitzpatrick were brief and sterile. Mrs. Fitzpatrick would arrive home precisely at 7 p.m., her face a mask of detached politeness. She would hand Aoife her wages, ask if everything was in order, and then dismiss her with a crisp nod. There was no warmth, no human connection. "Are the children happy?" Aoife once asked, a desperate attempt to find a glimmer of humanity. In the woman's eyes, "They are well cared for," Mrs. Fitzpatrick had replied, her voice as smooth and cold as marble. "That is what is important." Aoife began to understand Orla's words. The job wasn't about the children. It was about the time, the slow, mind-numbing passage of time. It was a form of solitary confinement, a psychological experiment in sensory deprivation. One day, while pushing Sheen on the swing, a boy from the local cafe, a tall, kind-faced young man named Liam, walked by. He had seen her there every day, a silent, solitary figure. Beautiful day for it, he called out, a friendly smile on his face. Aoife, starved for human contact, felt a jolt of hope. It is, she said, her voice rusty from disuse. You're here all day, aren't you? He asked, his voice gentle. I see you. From the cafe. 12 hours a day, Aoife said, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. Liam's smile faltered. He saw the haunted look in her eyes, a look he had seen on Orla's face when she would come into the cafe, her face pale, her hands shaking. You're Aoife, aren't you? Your sister Orla. She used to work here. She came in sometimes for a coffee. She said it was the only time she felt ... real. The mention of Orla's name was a jolt of cold water. Aoife's heart sank. She wasn't just a caregiver. She was a replacement, a stand-in for her sister's pain. She's recovering, Aoife said, her voice a whisper. I'm just doing this until she's better. Liam nodded, a look of profound sympathy on his face. Be careful, he said, his voice low. This place ... It's not a home, it's a prison, and the only thing they care about is the silence. His words echoed in her mind long after he had gone. A prison of ours.